Folks on the internet always jump straight to the extreme. They say, in quote, Nate, just grab the 12 gauge, that'll fix it, in quote. But you see, I didn't in oppos. Need a shotgun because I had something much more dangerous than lead and powder. I had a mountain of patience, 3-inch binder full of paperwork, and 3 rows of industrial-grade spike strips buried just beneath the dust of my own private road. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm 52 years old, and these 120 acres of Wyoming soil are the only thing I ever truly owned, a place where the air smells like sagebrush, and the only committee I have to answer to is the weather and the shifting seasons. I moved out here to get away from the noise, the HOA Karens, and the people who think a clipped lawn is a personality trait. But I guess peace is something you have to fight for even in the middle of nowhere. It started on a Tuesday morning in April, the kind of morning where the mist is still hugging the creek, and you can hear a hawk cry from a mile away. But then I heard it, a sound that didn't and oppos, belong in my valley. It was a high-pitched, expensive whine of a German engine. And before I could even set my coffee down, a silver Mercedes SUV came flying over the ridge of my property line, cutting a jagged scar right through the edge of my alfalfa field. I just stood there on the porch, watching this woman wave at me through the tinted glass like I was some hired hand on a resort, and then she was gone, disappearing toward the, in quote, Summit Ridge Estates, in quote, which is a fancy way of saying a bunch of million-dollar glass boxes built on a hill that used to be a grazing pasture. That was my introduction to Victoria Sterling, the woman who decided my farm was her personal shortcut to the interstate, and the woman who was about to learn that, in quote, private property, in quote, ISN and oppos, a suggestion in this part of the country. A few days later, she did it again, same time, same reckless speed, throwing gravel against the side of my equipment shed like she owned the air she was breathing. So I decided to be neighborly and flagged her down. She rolled that window down just a crack, wearing those oversized sunglasses that look like dragonflies, and before I could even get a word out, she sighed a long, dramatic sound like I was the one inconveniencing her. I told her, in quote, Ma and oppos, and my Don and oppos, know if you and oppos. Re-lost, but this is a private farm road, you and oppos. Re-trespassing and tearing up my crop, end quote. And she just gave me this thin, sharp smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes, and said, in quote, Oh, Don and oppos, be so dramatic, Elias. I looked at the map. There's a public access easement through here from the old logging days. So really, I'm doing you a favor by keeping the road packed down. End quote. I told her right then that the logging easement expired in 1984 and I had the deed to prove it, but she just tapped the steering wheel, told me to, end quote, get with the times, end quote, and drove right around me, nearly clipping my boot with her rear tire. I went to see my lawyer, Sarah, a woman who's lived in this county long enough to know where all the bodies are buried, and she pulled the titles, the plats, and the historical records, and sure enough, there wasn't an oppos, a whisper of an easement left on that land. Sarah looked at me over her glasses and said, and quote, Elias, you've got a clean title, which means every time she crosses that line, it's a criminal trespass, but people like Victoria Sterling Don and oppos, believe in laws that Don and oppos, have her name on them, end quote. And she was right. I started documenting everything, dates, times, high-definition photos of the ruts she was leaving in the mud. But Victoria didn't and oppos. Care about signs, she didn't and oppos. Care about the, end quote, no trespassing, end quote. Markers I hammered into the ground. She actually had the nerve to hop out of her car one afternoon and toss one of my signs into the ditch while she thought I wasn't oppos. Looking. My neighbor, an old-timer named Silas who's lived next door for 60 years, watched her fly by one morning and just spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt, saying, in quote, Elias, that woman thinks the whole world is a cul-de-sac and we're just the landscaping, end quote. And that hit the nail on the head. I wasn't oppos. Raised to be a mean man. My father always said that anger is a fire that burns the house it lives in, but he also said that a man who won an oppos, defend his fence line, might as well not have a house at all. I sent her a formal, certified cease and desist letter, the kind that requires a signature, so they can end oppos. Pretend they didn't end oppos. Get it. And the very next morning, I watched her drive past my porch and drop the shredded remains of that letter out her window, like it was wedding confetti. That was the moment the end quote. Neighborly Elias, end quote. Went in the shed in the end, Logistics Elias, Came out because I spent 20 years managing heavy freight. And if there's one thing I know, it's how to stop a moving object without breaking a sweat. I didn't in oppose. To want to fight, I want a solution. So I spent the next month being the most boring, meticulous man in Wyoming. I installed solar-powered trail cams at every angle. I logged the GPS coordinates of every tire track. And I even invited the local sheriff, a guy named Miller who's more interested in fishing than paperwork, out for a cup of coffee. I showed him the footage, the destroyed signs, and the vet bill for my lead mare, Bella, who'd sliced her leg open when Victoria's engine spooked the herd into the wire fence, and Miller just rubbed his neck and said, Elias, I can write her a ticket, but her husband's a big-time developer, and they'll just pay the fine and keep doing it, unless you make it too expensive for her to keep trying. That's when Sarah, my lawyer, gave me the golden ticket. She told me about, active deterrents, that are legal on private property as long as they are clearly, undeniably, and excessively marked. Because the law says if you give a person 100 chances to stop and they still keep coming, whatever happens next is on their own head. I ordered the kit from company that supplies security for remote mining sites. Industrial-grade spike strips, the kind that fold down into the dirt but have a mechanism that locks them upright if you don an oppose. T have the remote, but I didn't in oppose. T just hide them like a trap. No, I went in, full government, on that road. I put up 3-foot wide yellow signs that could be seen from space. I painted in, deterrent devices ahead, in reflective red paint on the asphalt where my road meets the county line, and I even sent a copy of my security plan to the sheriff's office via registered mail. I wanted there to be zero doubt, no, I didn't in oppose. TC in, no, I didn't in oppose. Tino, because people like Victoria thrive on the, I'm just a confused lady, act, and I was going to strip that away from her tire by tire. The morning it all went down was a Monday. The air was crisp, and I sat on my porch with my laptop open, watching the live feed from the gate camera, and sure enough, at 7:45 a.m., the silver Mercedes appeared. She didn't in oppose. T even tapped the brakes when she saw the new signs. She didn't in oppose. T hesitate when she drove over the bright red warning paint. She just kept that sunglasses-wearing head high, probably thinking I was just playing some game. I watched on the screen as she hit the first row. Pop, pop. The sound was so clear it picked up on the microphone, and the front of that heavy SUV dipped as the run flats tried to compensate. She actually sped up. She thought she could power through it. And that's when she hit the second and third rows, and that Mercedes turned from a luxury vehicle into a multi-ton paperweight in about 4 seconds flat. The sound of metal rims grinding into my gravel road was the most beautiful symphony I'd heard in years, a rhythmic screeching in no, that she couldn't in oppose, T ignore, and I watch her hop out of the car, screaming at the sky, kicking the flat rubber like it was my fault she'd ignored 50 warning signs. I didn't in oppose. T rush out there. I finished my coffee. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and told them a trespasser had disabled their vehicle on my property, and then I walked down the hill with my folder of evidence tucked under my arm. When she saw me, she looked like she was going to spontaneously combust. She was screaming about, traps, and lawsuits, and how she was going to own my farm by the end of the week, but I just stood there, calm as a pond, and pointed to the 3 signs she'd passed in the last 100 yards. I told her, Victoria, the signs told you to stop. The paint told you to stop. The law told you to stop. But you thought you were bigger than the dirt you and oppose. Standing on. Now, you can wait for the tow truck, but since this is a private road and you and oppose, recurrently obstructing my agricultural operations, there's going to be a $500 an hour in oppose, storage fee in oppose, for every hour that car sits on my land. The look on her face was worth every penny I'd spent on the spikes. It was the look of a person who finally realized that their, influence, ended exactly where my property line began. The sheriff arrived, took one look at the signs, one look at the, incident log, I handed him, and then he actually laughed while he wrote her a citation for criminal trespass and reckless driving, because he'd had enough of the Summit Ridge crowd thinking the county was their personal playground too. Victoria's husband tried to sue me. Of course, they spent 6 months trying to find a loophole, but Sarah just kept throwing my, due diligence, folder at them, the notifications, the sheriff-inspected signs, the recorded warnings, and eventually, their own lawyer told them to drop it before I countersued for the damage to my road and my livestock. Now, the valley is quiet again. The only tracks on my road are from my own truck and the occasional deer, and every time I see a silver SUV in town, I just tip my hat and smile, knowing that sometimes the only way to deal with a person who thinks they're above the law is to bury the law right where they're going to drive over it. But it makes me wonder, did I go too far? Or is this just what it takes to protect what's yours in a world that's constantly trying to pave over it? I see people in the comments saying I'm a hero, and others saying I'm a, vindictive old man, who should have just built a gate. But you see, a gate can be cut, a gate can be rammed, but a person's ego? That's much harder to repair once it's been flattened. What would you have done if someone was systematically destroying your livelihood and laughing in your face while they did it? Would you have kept being, neighborly, until there was nothing left to protect, or would you have drawn a line in the dirt and stood behind it? Drop a comment below. Let me know if you think Victoria got what she deserved or if I'm the villain in her story, because out here in Wyoming, the line between right and wrong is often as thin as a property deed, and I'm curious to see where you'd stand. Don and Oppos, don't forget to hit that like button if you believe in private property rights, and subscribe for more stories from the fence line, because there's a lot more than just corn growing on this farm.